The question of church-state relations remained essentially unresolved, a profoundly divisive issue at the historic juncture when Filipino elites confronted the task of defining their vision of national community and the type of state they wanted to erect. However, for the sake of political expediency, the short-lived Malolos Republic maintained the unity of church and state. Amid the exigencies of the moment, it opted to retain Catholicism as the state religion on the model of church-state union under the patronatorial of the 19th century. It would take the American imperial occupation of the Philippines to settle the issue that the Filipino elites could not resolve. The U.S. colonial policy on church-state separation was first enunciated on July 6, 1900 by Major General Elwell Stephen Otis, who as military governor pledged that, I quote, as under the Constitution of the United States, complete freedom is guaranteed, and no minister of religion can be interfered with or molested in following his calling in a peaceful and lawful manner, and there must be a complete separation of church and state. Animated by the First Amendment, the principles of religious freedom and church-state separation were confirmed in the Organic Act or Cooper Law, passed by the U.S. Congress in 1902, also known as the Philippine Bill of 1902, which provided the framework of government in the Philippines until its replacement by the Jones Law of 1916. Section 5 of this legislation declared that no law shall be made respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, and that the free exercise in the enjoyment of religious profession and worship without discrimination or preference shall forever be allowed. Despite this avowed U.S. policy, at the outset there was a period of confusion on the part of some Filipinos who represented the separationist position in Malolos because of how the U.S. seemingly favored the friars. The 1898 Treaty of Paris bound the U.S. to protect friars and other Spanish subjects, respect property rights of the Catholic Church, and indemnify the Church for war-inflicted damages to ecclesiastical property. This working out of the U.S. policy of separation, which extended protection to the Church, its ministers, and properties, was based on the friendly separation that then prevailed in the United States, which was beyond the ken of the separationists in Malolos, whose stance indicated hostile separation. Based on their limited grasp of how an independent Philippines would relate to Rome, Filipino elites on both sides of the debate were also not attuned to the political maneuvering that the United States had to play with the Vatican. Soon, however, Filipino elites began to grasp the U.S. policy on church-state separation and the colonial government's adherence to it. The Catholic Church was clearly disestablished as it no longer received state funds nor controlled public education. Priests, qua-priests no longer held positions in the government. The state had no authority to make appointments in the ecclesiastical hierarchy, and Protestants were free to proselytize and establish their own churches. Most significantly, because the U.S. considered discontent in their friar states a major cause of the Philippine Revolution, it insisted on the redistribution of these properties, to which the Vatican agreed, albeit subject to consultation with the religious orders. A long period of haggling ensued, with the Dominicans, Recollects, and Augustinians resorting to machinations and intrigues as in the 19th century, in an effort to realize greater profits for themselves, as Antolin Oy put it. Eventually, the agreement was signed in December of 1903, resulting in the partition of these monastic estates to the benefit mainly of wealthy Filipinos. Despite limitations, the American policy effectively dismantled the friar lands, and the friar orders lost their power base in the Philippine countryside. Spain's laws of the Philippine Islands logically suggested the secession of the Patronato Real, which the Vatican acknowledged in December of 1902 through Leo XIII's promulgation of the Quae Mari Sinico. This bill suppressed the ancient privileges of the religious orders. However, the Vatican refused to order the withdrawal of the friars from the Philippines, although it acquiesced to an informal agreement with the U.S. for their voluntary expatriation. At the start of the revolution against Spain in 1896, there were 1,124 friars in the country. During the fighting, most of them escaped to Manila, but about 300 were taken prisoners and about 50 were killed. By December of 1903, only 246 friars remained. They were either too old or infirm to return to parish work, or just plain realistic to confine themselves to educational institutions in Manila, Cebu, and Vigan, with schools as their new power base, given the reduced personnel. The friar orders were permitted by the United States to remain in the Philippines without being perceived as a threat to the social order. However, the leadership of the friar orders remained in Spanish hands, who decided to relocate their headquarters to Spain. The Vatican subsequently moved to replenish the depleted stock of Spanish clergy with American and other European clergy. Religious congregations with no prior engagements in the Philippines started to set up shop for the first time in the country. U.S. intervention and agreement with the Vatican also ensured that under U.S. rule, the Filipinization of the Catholic Church would not happen in any substantial way. In effect, the Catholic Church in the Philippines remained a largely colonial institution. Most parishes were indeed passed on to Filipino priests for lack of alternative personnel, and this might have pleased the proponents of Filipinization. But the church upper echelon was a different story. By 1906, four of the five episcopal sees in the Philippines were held by American bishops, with Father George Barlin being named the only Filipino bishop who was assigned to Nueva Canceras. The appointment of American bishops was resented by Filipinos who wished to see Filipino clergy rest to the episcopate in their own country. To appease this resentment, 3 years later, two more Filipinos attained episcopal rank, Pablo Singzon for Calbayog and Juan Gordo for Cebu, token gestures to pacify the clamor for Filipinization. In analyzing this episode, Peter Going suggestively commented that these appointments proved to be a wise move. The American bishops were able to give leadership in a time when the Roman Catholic Church was adjusting to the new condition of separation of church and state in the islands, and could no longer look to the civil authorities to support its policies, enforce its regulations, and provide all other benefits of patronage. By implication, the Filipino clergy by and large remained trapped in the tradition of the church-state unity under Spain, and could have been troublesome to the American colonial authorities. Indeed, As the American period wore on, most of the Filipino clergy continued to be steeped in Hispanic language and outlook, forever longing for the Spanish past and perpetuating this nostalgia in Spanish language seminaries. The church was colonial in an out of sync way. Like the Filipino clergy who lobbied against the outcome in Malolos, this Hispanicized clergy in an Americanized country repudiated the separation of church and state, an attitude that prevailed until the 1950s, as Schumacher perceptibly observed. In fact, from the mid-1940s onwards, in defending their interests in the education against perceived nationalist threats, Catholic bishops began to make pronouncements that since then have fostered the imaginary a Catholic nation based on a conflation of the body Catholic and the body politic. With all the contradictions already evident at the end of the 19th century. This was made into a holy grail, the vision of national community that in Malolos, Calderon championed, Mabini devised, and Aglipay executed.